Good morning, Jill. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm great. We've made it almost all the way through the week. So it's
Yes.
fantastic.
Happy Thursday.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for joining our show today, our startup chat. And I am very excited to have you today. You are by training a nurse. However,
Yes.
you have ventured into the entrepreneurship world. And so that's what we're all about, talking about how to transition from your area and into the mindset of being an entrepreneur. So, welcome and thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you. Thanks again. Yes. So it is a very different world. So I've been a nurse for more than 2 decades, and so I'm very skilled in the clinical side and all that knowledge and experience. I was primarily in oncology almost that entire time, and I'm still consulting in that field. But yes, I kind of stumbled upon being a nurse entrepreneur without even really realizing it when I almost 10 years ago. In fact, I didn't recognize what I was starting to, get into when I first started doing some consulting work. So that's really where my journey started. And again, it's like when I started consulting and speaking, I didn't even recognize what I was like just cracking the door open to.
Mhm.
But that really was truly the beginning of my path and of my journey as an entrepreneur.
And at what point did you realize that you were making that shift, that mindset shift into the entrepreneur world?
It took a while because I think I was still in disbelief because when I was doing that, I had and just a real quick background of
Sure.
I was married at the time and I just had my first baby. And as many moms, things who are working moms, your priorities suddenly shift. And mine shifted when my daughter ended up in the hospital, admitted after like the first week of daycare with RSV. And my husband is an entrepreneur as well. And so we considered that our first baby, his business. And so we actually waited 11 years. We were married 11 years before we had our first daughter.
Mhm.
And so when that all happened, I'm like, okay, this is not what our priority is for us. And our families were both states away. And so I said, okay, we're going to figure this out. And
Mhm.
so that's when I actually resigned from a job that I absolutely loved. I
Mhm.
loved my job. I was a clinical research manager at a cancer center. Loved the work that I was doing, loved my team. But priorities just shifted for me. And so
Right.
a lot of people are looking for that work life balance. I think that's a myth. Quite honest, I was looking for work life harmony. I wanted it's all one life. And I wanted to have that harmony between personal and professional and be fulfilled while still not sacrificing my whole personal life or my family. And so that's why I resigned and started doing some consulting work for the cancer center that I just left. And also started doing some speaking for pharmaceutical companies that was within my expertise of oncology, and immunotherapy was just coming on the market. So I did a lot of
Mhm.
education and talks that way.
Okay. And so the discussions that you were having during your consultancy, what was it focused on initially, and did it change into different types of topics at some point?
Yeah. So, of course, as a consultant, you can decide to really niche down in what it is, the type of service, the topic, or, that you do. Or, you can be kind of in the field. And so I was in oncology when I first started out. And so while I was working with the cancer center, I was focused on the research department. They needed expertise. They didn't have so I was an interim manager, but I was doing that, I wasn't there physically all the time. So I was doing staff training, I was doing interviewing, I was doing hiring, I was in charge of QA, I was putting out all the fires, I was training a lot of staff, and became the new manager as well to take over that role with somebody who didn't have experience in that role. So it really was kind of a consulting trainer
Mhm.
type of role for that specific contract that I was working.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you were working in the business. Because in
Yes.
the entrepreneur world, either you're working in the business or you're working
Yes.
on the business.
Yes.
And so did that shift happen for you?
Yes, it did, but not for years. Like I worked in the business, and that's where I said, I think, I didn't really recognize what I was tapping into and what the potential was before me until honestly the last probably 3 years maybe of working is that I realized, and after as you are consulting, I began working and speaking with other nurses, and they were shocked that this is what I was doing full time. They're like, but what else do you do? Like, what hospital do you work for? What cancer center do you work for? What clinic, what organization are you tied to? And I'm like, I'm independent. I have my own business. And so it was eye opening to many of them. And that's kind of what made me also recognize that, oh yeah, I could actually, I am truly independently practicing. And so more nurses started asking me, how are you doing that? And they were across industries. So I started working with other nurses in other specialties, nurse practitioners in ER, critical care, long-term care nurses, who had their own field of expertise. And the question was, how do I become an independently practicing nurse and use all those skills and knowledge that I have and leverage it as a consultant? And so that's what I really started shifting to. Okay, I'm just really truly scratching the surface of being a nurse in business. And that's where it shifted to, okay, how do I create this structure? How do I create the business and the vehicle that allows other nurses to do what I'm doing in their own right?
Mhm. So you were essentially training nurses to make that shift from
Yes.
being a practitioner to an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And
And
so
so go ahead.
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
And so, as you know, the mindset of that alone is one of the biggest shifts and hardest shifts for a lot of nurses to make because we're trained to be, employees. Truly, we're
Right.
trained to be employees. We want that. We know exactly what we're going to make. It's a guaranteed paycheck. We show up and are told this is our list of responsibilities. This is what we're going to do today. This is what we're responsible for. And then we get through it. And then we come back the next day and we do the same thing. And as an entrepreneur, you're the one who's creating that from scratch. You really decide what services you're going to provide. And here's the beauty of it. You get to decide. You get to decide exactly who you want to work with and exactly what focus you want your services to cover. And so no more doesn't have to be. We can let go of the days of, well, I really like this little 10% sliver of what I do, but it comes with this 90% of stuff that I'm just drudging through. You can completely flip that and really focus on, serving the people you want to serve, doing what you absolutely love and what, fills you up and drives you, your purpose, your passion.
Right, which is one of the benefits and beauties, I think, of being an entrepreneur.
Yes.
It definitely has its challenges, but ultimately, I think the freedom of making those decisions that impact you personally and professionally, there's nothing else more satisfying than that. And
I
so,
will 100% agree.
yes. So today you have, I have your website pulled up. It's called Nurse Assure. And
Yes.
and so do you mind just talking a little bit about that and what you do and how you're able to spread your message?
Sure. So in my other, I have two arms actually of my business. So my other website is jillweberding.com. That's currently being overhauled. I would expect it will be up in all its glory by the time this is aired. But Nurse Assure is the consulting business that I started. And so I focused when I originally started, I was taking my skills and expertise in oncology, and I was really focused on the gap in patient and caregiver education. And so that's where I started my consulting services. But as your business grows, it evolves, and so your offers can evolve as well. And what I really became known for is creating medical metaphors and breaking down things that are really complex in healthcare and making them simple and easy to understand. And so that's where the education and support made simple comes into play. And so now I'm creating medical metaphors, not just in oncology, although that's still probably the mainstay, but I can do that across industries. So my consulting side is primarily doing that. And I also serve as a strategic advisor for an oncology startup as well. And so I have, those types of roles. Depending on what the business is, then my role and expertise will change as far as what I'm providing them, the value that they want me to focus on. And then the other side of the business is really being a nurse business strategist. And that's showing nurses that there is lots of opportunities for them in business. In fact, I consider it the best kept secret in nursing is the specialty of business. And that's, you're still a nurse, you're using all your nursing skills and expertise, but you're doing it in a different way. And so for me, one of the reasons I left clinical practice and being tied to a specific organization was, you keep seeing the gaps in healthcare. And I think everyone can agree right now that there are a lot of gaps in our current system. And so while nurses in general advocate, I would say relentlessly most of the time for patients and for their coworkers and their colleagues as far as quality improvement and change in process, sometimes you just feel like you're beating your head against the wall. And so the gaps continue to widen, or they just stay where they are and new ones pop up. And so for a lot of the nurses that I've been working with, they just, like me, couldn't stomach the gaps anymore. And so they know that there is something they can do. And there's never an easy button, but there is certainly progress that can be made. And so what I've done is I've been working with other really purpose-driven, passionate nurses in their field of expertise. And we're talking about, okay, what's the big gap that you are passionate about? What is it within your skill set that you can do to close that gap and improve healthcare, in your space? And so we create what I call a solution match of problem in the market with their field of, experience and expertise, and their unique spin on how they would address it. Because most people, we're not addressing brand new problems, right? These problems are out there. There are existing solutions, but for some reason, it's not working. And so we look at that very critically with a scrutinous eye to try to figure out, well, why is the existing solutions out there not working? And you can even take me, for example, when I got into cancer education, there are countless nonprofits as well as very world-renowned cancer institutes and organizations who all have patient education on their website, right? They have it accessible. But something's not clicking because we still see thousands and thousands of patients in chat rooms asking very basic questions and soliciting medical advice. And so the concern for me was, having been in some of those rooms and having had multiple family members who also had cancer as part of their story, I knew they weren't getting reliable information. And so the question became, how can I help close that gap? And so that's what, started really my consulting services, and a lot of the medical metaphors that is the way to really break down something simply and help it stick, make the idea sticky to patients. But I've worked with other nurses who were in long-term care, for example, and they constantly are, inundated with more and more regulations, yet they're, trying to, manage staff and morale, and they're using temporary staffing and hemorrhaging, their revenue because of particularly their temporary staffing. And we see so many long-term care organizations that just aren't sustainable. And so, one of the nurses that I worked with has been, an associate director of nursing and a DON and, a credentialing consultant. And she actually has a solution because she's been in the trenches she has a sustainability solution for long-term care organizations. And so the question is, we have this huge gap, this persistent problem in the market with long-term care having issues, and we have nurses who they know the answer. They can help solve the problem, but nobody knows they exist. And nobody knows how to get in, to work with them. And so that's really the big push to help other nurses in their field of expertise to get out into the market and say, hey, this is a solvable problem, but we need to be using people who are, have what I call that dual user experience that only nurses do as providers, and can give the patient experience side to actually be working and shaping the solutions.
Right. And so that's amazing, everything you just said, because what you've described, and you said the word a couple of times, what you're describing is someone who is a strategist.
Yes.
Someone who steps out of their role and looks at the big picture.
Yes.
And really identifies, you're shifting from just focusing on your one patient, but you're looking at the big picture and all the patients as a whole, and our community as a whole, and thinking about all the different problems, all the different moving parts, and coming up with a solution, a viable solution that ultimately what you've described is that's what entrepreneurs do. And you're able to, it sounds like you've successfully been able to scale that message, and you're touching other nurses, the nurse that you described, to get her to think more of in a strategic type of way and to provide solutions, because it's so needed. And I agree with everything you said in the sense that there are solutions, but no one is really out there spreading the message, which is the beauty of what you do. You're helping make those connections for these nurses in all the fields. So I love everything you just said.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, is to recognize, and that's probably a good word for what I do is, I'm a connector. I'm becoming more so a connector between these nurse experts as consultants and the organizations or whoever their audience is that can actually, get together and solve the problem that needs to be solved. And so, ironically, when that nurse first, started working with me, in her mind, she was going to create a course to help train directors of nursing in the facility. And, as we continue to work together, we go through this whole process of, well, are you sure? Like, are they going to pay for your services? Is this the right audience? Are we targeting the right people? Because if you get it wrong, you're never going to make a sale, right? You're never going to build your business. You have to be clear on who is it that is going to actually pay for your services. And it may be different than the ultimate benefactor. It may be different than, and quite often is different than, who you think initially on the surface is actually going to pay for your services. And so she came in thinking she was going to create a training course for nurses and for nurse leaders because she had all that experience. But the reality was, the more we talked about it, I'm like, but what you're talking about is a major systemic problem that needs to be solved. We are losing, companies are closing their doors because they're not sustainable as an organization. And that puts patients further away from their families because they have to be shipped out to other facilities. Like, these are big problems that we're tackling, and they are all solvable if we tap into the right resources, and they're typically accessible. And so that's what I'm saying, and kind of is the big message, is that nurses are an incredibly untapped resource that can be helped shaping and solving healthcare solutions, whether that's a healthcare startup or an existing, organization who is having a persistent problem. They're not tapping into the right resources and getting the answers and the insight from the trenches, who can really deliver the solutions that need to be, brought to fruition.
Right. And you talked about something else that I myself have experienced, is essentially you have to put on a marketing hat too.
Yes.
So as an entrepreneur, so for myself, I'm trained, my background is law. And so I was a lawyer, or I am a lawyer. And so I went to law school for 3 years. I learned about, different areas of law. And so at some point in my career, I decided I wanted to have my own practice. So I've had and I've opened an employment law firm. And so we advise startups in terms of, how do you scale your HR department? What's the best practices for hiring? Any issue that touches upon the employer-employee relationship. the biggest hurdle for me as an entrepreneur and a lawyer was understanding that I had to take off that lawyer hat and I had to put on my marketing hat. And I'm not a marketer. I'm not trained, but it was a necessary thing that I had to learn it, because you're right. Ultimately, if I want to scale my message, I had to understand who my market was. And it seems logical maybe for marketers, but for those of us that are trained in a specific field, we really don't think about that. We think we simply, like for me, for example, when I'm talking to a client, my mind is always, my default is always, are they paying them correctly? Have they categorized them correctly? I'm talking as in your world, I'm very clinical about the advice. And so personally, for me, now that I have shifted into the startup world, I appreciate the different hats that we all have to wear: the marketing hat, the finance hat, the operations hat, and the list goes on and on. And so, I applaud you for taking on this, this journey and really getting the message out, because I think it's necessary.
Yeah. And what you said is so, so true. I'm sitting over here just smiling from ear to ear, because your story is exactly like every other nurse's story. So, this is a good demonstration of, it doesn't matter what your startup is. It doesn't matter what type of industry you as an entrepreneur that you are in, what space you're in, because it's, for most of us, unless you're in marketing and business, you are trained, particularly skilled professionals are trained, as you said, in that clinic. For us, it's clinical role, right? And so that's the practitioner side. Absolutely. And so this was probably one of my biggest, not even one, it was by far my biggest mistake starting out, is not recognizing and not embracing the role that I needed to, an identity that I needed to step into, that I was a marketer. Because one of my, and I avoided it, because like, you mentioned, it's like, ooh, it's out of our comfort zone. As nurses, most of us, we've never had a business class. We've never had a marketing class. We are focused on clinical care, right? And our patients. And so that is where we love and live and breathe. So when you come in as an entrepreneur, that all shifts. That's incredibly important, but that's the practitioner side. And so, as you said, this other hat, which turns out to be, let's be honest, the most important part. And I didn't discover this until, like I said, the last 3 years or so, working with a mentor who, and I will never forget this, told me, if you can't market what you do better than you can do what you can do, you won't be doing what you do very long.
Wow.
And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because here I was avoiding the thing that was actually going to make me successful and sustainable. And I was allowing the nurses that I was working with to do the same thing. Like, let's just try to, like, yeah, we'll get to that. But, it was easy because that was so far out of our comfort zone. And now, so as a result of that, I was like, I've got to dive in. I need to be relentless about learning this marketing side, because as soon as I heard that, it just clicked, and I knew that it was 100% correct. And if I didn't shift, I was going to be out of business. And so, and I couldn't help nurses achieve the impact and goals that they wanted to, personally or professionally, if I couldn't teach them how to do the same thing. And so the last, 2 years, particularly, I really have been relentless about working with marketing mentors, marketing masters, truly, in all their rights, whether it is on the sales side, the copywriting side, the messaging side, the content, all of those pieces. That strategy, marketing strategy, is really the key, truly, to being successful and sustainable. And so now I'm thrilled to be bringing that to nurses, so that they don't have to go spend either, the thousands of dollars with mentors, or, with people that they don't even know. They don't even know who to go to. And so I'm bringing that into my collaborative, the Nurse Consultant Collaborative, so that we have this key piece. So you're not just learning, again, how to package your skills. It won't do you any good if you can't convey your message and let people know how you can serve them.
And so ultimately you become the conduit of not what they want, but what they need to
Yes.
become
Right.
successful. Right.
But it is still always marketing what they want. And ultimately what they want is they want to help a lot of dang people, right? And they want to have clients consistently. And how do we do that? Marketing. Right? It's the back end. It's building that back end of your business that at least most nurses that I have worked with, and certainly those starting out, it's the piece that we really want to avoid. But that foundation in your business, and I'm sure this is probably true for other entrepreneurs, it's really easy to stay in our comfort zone where our skill lies and just be like, but I'm so good, it's not from an ego standpoint. You're really good at what you do because you spent so many hours doing it. And so you truly are an expert. And that has tremendous value, but only if you can let people know, if people know you, that you exist, and if you can let them know how you can help them. And that's marketing.
Yes. And so what would be, if you could leave your viewers with one major tip, what would it
Just
be?
one?
Or three. Let's go with three.
This is what I would say. These are probably my top three tips for, I would say, for all my nurse entrepreneurs, but certainly I think this would resonate across industries. And the first tip I would have is to stop accepting that's just the way it is type of thinking. I mean, that really drives me. That is kind of the deeper purpose behind my business. And because I'm in healthcare, there is a lot of that's just the way it is type of thinking in healthcare. But we can see that in education. We can see that in business. We can see it across industries. So that would be my big first piece of advice, is to stop accepting unacceptable answers, right? Why would we accept things that aren't working? Why wouldn't we always be striving and innovating for better? And so that's the kind of world I want my kids to live in, where that's just the way it is, doesn't really exist. And they're always striving for and innovating for better. Because I think that's who we really are. And then my next one would be to expand your vision. And that's to go, beyond your comfort zone, your skill set, and really expand your vision on how you can take that and serve more on a scalable number. And so like, that's what I think when I talk to nurses about being in business is, often this is not just society's perception, but even within our profession, that we feel most impactful at the bedside, right? Doing direct patient care. But as you and I have, you alluded to before, that, it's really inefficient, if we're being honest, because we can only touch so many individual lives in a shift, in a day. And so when you become an entrepreneur and you join the business world, what you focus on is systems and strategies and processes and infrastructure that will actually help you take your skills and expertise and scale it so you can impact the masses. And don't we need some massive impact in healthcare right now? And so that's, where I talk to nurses about, and other entrepreneurs, whatever your space is, expand your vision. It's, as long as there are people, who have problems, there will be a need for people to solve those problems. And as we all know, doesn't seem to be any shortage of problems in the world. So that just means there's infinite numbers of opportunities to solve those problems. So expand your vision, then, and let your offers evolve. And then my last piece of advice would be to recognize that you are enough exactly how you are right now. You are enough right now. You can be helping thousands of people as you sit, as you are right now, with the training, with the education, with the degree, with the cert, whatever you have, whatever it is, you have enough right now to be helping people. And nurses really fall into the trap of, and I think it's this archaic, system, the antiquated system that we've been trained and raised in, is that you need the extra degree, you need the extra certification. And so confidence doesn't come from a piece of paper. You can keep, chasing all the degrees. And I can see it, when they tell me about their experience, I'm like, degree hoarder, I see you. I got your number, friend. And it's really about confidence and self-worth and recognizing that you have enough and are enough as you are right now to help a tremendous amount of people. And then, of course, as you're doing that, you're going to learn infinitely more by the doing, right? By the actually being in it. And so if you really want a certification, knock yourself out, go for it, but recognize that your feeling of what you can do and how you can serve is not going to change with a piece of paper.
Jill Weberding, I love your message. And I love that you ended it with that you are enough, because you're absolutely right. I think and that's not just for nurses. I think that goes across the board from everyone who is contemplating taking this startup journey.
Absolutely.
There's a reason they're thinking about it. And so take the lead. And thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, that seed has been planted in you for a reason. Don't ignore it.
Exactly.
It's there, and it's likely not planted in the same way in anyone else. So if you don't follow through, if you don't listen to it, if you don't bring it to fruition, it just simply won't exist.
Right. And the world is missing out.
The world is missing out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Bertha.
You're very welcome. And I look forward to chatting with you again, perhaps on some different topics, but I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.